Well, there's only a few weeks left till the Eagles officially report to training camp, and while the roster is pretty stacked, the bubble players are vast. There's a lot of people who might not make the roster, and there are plenty who actually might squeak onto the 53-man roster. Let's take a look at the biggest bubble players heading into training camp on the Eagles' overall 90-man roster right now. I'm Thomas Mott. This is the Thomas Mott Show. Before we go ahead and start today's show, quick picture here that you're really going to enjoy. This was at the rookie, cookout, where they had all the Eagle rookies cooking for some of the veterans at the NovaCare Complex. That's Jordan Davis on the left. That's Jalen Carter on the right. Remember, Jalen Carter is a massive, massive human being. He's 6'3". He's one of the strongest college football players in all of college football last year. He looks like a little boy next to Jordan Davis. Can't wait to see both of those two stacking it up on that defensive line and really, hopefully, dominating on the Philadelphia Eagles' entire team for many, many years to come. Now, as we go ahead and get into this whole idea of bubble candidates, and when you look at the overall roster, there are plenty of locks. There are plenty of people who are not going to make it, clearly, and plenty of people who are on the bubble. We're going to dive into all of those here and give you a full look ahead going into training camp of some of the players on the roster. Now, PhillyVoice.com does a really good job showcasing the locks here, and there's no arguments. Just quickly to move through all the players who for sure are going to make it. Hurts, Mariota, DeAndre Swift, Kenny Gainwell, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert. You see the offensive linemen here. Reddick, Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox on the defensive line, Nakobe Dean, Darius Slay, Terrell Edmonds, Jake Elliott. Barring trades, as they say, all of these players are 1,000,000% going to be on the Philadelphia Eagles roster. Now, that's not a surprise. Where we get to the interesting part here are the near locks and then the bubble player. Now, when you go through position by position, it gets very interesting. There are no near locks at the quarterback spot. Tanner McKee versus Ian Book is any man's battle, and they're both not going to make the actual active roster. They won't be dressed, barring an injury, on Sundays, but they're battling for practice squad spots. You can usually only keep one practice squad quarterback, and so none of them, at least two backups, are near locks for the quarterback spot. Running back, Rashad Penny should be a lock. Boston Scott should be a lock, but again, if you were to have Trey Sermon outperform, who we'll talk about here in a second, they could slide off the depth chart. I've said before, they're not keeping 5 running backs. They're going to keep 4. One will go to the practice squad. I think Penny and Boston Scott make it, as does Philly Voice, but still, it's worth noting they're not guaranteed on this roster because neither of them make enough money to where you could cut them and not worry about your pocketbook and your cap space at all. Now, when you get to wide receiver, Quez Watkins, Lamine Zaccheaus, Britton Covey, they're basically guaranteed to make this roster. However, if one were to slip up and one of these undrafted free agents or somebody else were to rise to the occasion, you could see a guy like Quez Watkins let go. Now, he did get a pay raise for this season, $2.75 million. Talked about it yesterday. That's why he's in the near lock category here, but technically not a guarantee any one of those 3 make the roster. Grant Calcaterra is your one tight end, and then, of course, no one on the defensive line, no one on the offensive line. We know who is a lock and who's a bubble player. Linebackers are Morrow and Christian Ellis. They feel like they're going to make the roster. Question is, where will they be on that roster? How competitive can they be during training camp? Are they starters? Are they backup players? Will both them start? Will one start? Who knows? But they're definitely near locks on this roster. Same with Zach McPherson and same with Kayvon Wallace, who are the 2 secondary players who will make the roster. It'd be shocking if they didn't, but it's time to put up or shut up right now if they actually want to see playing time, making them other near locks, of course, here on Philly Voice. Now, let's get to the meat and potatoes of today's show. These are the bubble players, the actual bubble players on this roster who may or may not make it, who are battling for key positions. These are the key battles to keep an eye out on training camp. Of course, we just mentioned it, quarterback, Tanner McKee and Ian Book. Neither one of these has a leg up. Maybe Ian Book because he's been on the roster for at least a year and understands the playbook, but Tanner McKee has a lot of potential with that big body coming out of Stanford. He has a really good shot at making this roster over Ian Book, or at least having a chance at the practice squad if they were to dress 2 and keep 1 as a reserve in 2023. Running backs, there's just one, Trey Sermon. Now, Trey Sermon gets more love than any 4th, 5th string running back in the entire National Football League. Eagle fans rave about, this is the year for Trey Sermon. This is the season where he's going to make the roster. Did you see him in the Jacksonville Jaguar game? He popped off some big runs. However, in reality, the odds that Trey Sermon beats out Boston Scott, who has an extreme veteran presence on this roster, or beats out Rashad Penny, who is a lightning in a bottle type of running back if he can stay healthy, is very unlikely. I don't think that he does. I think eventually he will be let go, and I could see him being one of those very early, undrafted free agent cut candidates who then gets picked up by another running back needy team and actually sees some playing time. Philadelphia, the issue with them is they've just done so well adding in new running backs that Trey Sermon continues to fall down the depth chart. And they can say they love him all they want, but until they showcase their actions of actually putting him above other players on the depth chart and using him more than just in one game last year, I will continue to think he's not going to end up making this roster, making him one of the key bubble players. Your wide receivers, Joseph Ngata, Devin Allen, I mean, any sort of undrafted free agent wide receiver, especially going into this offseason, there isn't a lot of room. We talk about locks being A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, but if you throw in Quez Watkins and Britton Covey and Alonzo Zaccheaus, you're at 5 receivers, and Philadelphia doesn't need more than 5 receivers. And while Ngata might make the practice squad, Devin Allen did last year, they have to do incredible things, not just in training camp, but especially in preseason, in order to have any sort of chance to make this roster. They are big-time bubble players, and I think in the end, neither will end up making the final roster. Tight ends are the same. Dan Arnold and Tyree Jackson both have their pluses. Tyree Jackson has been in the system for a while. He's massive. He's shown a lot of potential. However, he can't stay healthy. Now, he was healthy at OTAs, and he turned some heads via some reporters at OTAs, but you have to, again, showcase that you're worthy of making the roster over a guy like Grant Calcaterra, who at least a draft pick was spent on him and has a real chance to potentially be the heir apparent, or at least the number 2 to Dallas Goedert. Offensive line, Sua Opeta, Brett Toth, no surprise there, not much to say. They got a lot of work ahead of them. The practice squad kind of feels like the right spot for them, although Opeta has been gaining a little bit of traction in recent years at the tackle position. Defensive line, people will say Moro Ojomo, Patrick Johnson, Derek Barnett, they're guarantees, right? Ojomo was a draft pick. Well, again, it's a crowded defensive tackle field, especially in the defensive line, and Ojomo didn't do much during OTAs. He didn't impress anybody to the point that anyone really talked about him. Now, you get to training camp, and you go against the first-team offensive line, get some second-team reps, showcase what you're capable of doing, make some tackles in preseason, and sure, you can make the roster. I think he will, but keep an eye on both him, Patrick Johnson, Derek Barnett, Katavius Street, Janarius Robinson. There are just not enough defensive tackle mouths to feed to keep all these guys in the defensive line. A lot of these guys are going to be cut. Very few of them will make the roster as a bubble candidate. Linebackers, very simple. Kyron Johnson and Sean Bradley. Now, Davion Taylor is also a name to keep an eye on here. Will he end up making the roster? Will he not? I think he will. The problem for Sean Bradley is you're kind of running out of time, right? Your rookie contract is going to be up here pretty soon. There isn't a scenario where you're probably going to start just because you have Nakobe Dean and Nicholas Morrow and Christian Ellis are above you in the depth chart. He's a big-time, I would say, special teams player, but you don't need a lot of big-time special teams players for a little bit more money after this season. I could definitely see him being let go. Cornerbacks, Joby, Greedy Williams, Josiah Scott. Williams has the best chance out of the 3 just due to the fact he's longer and a little bit more experience at the cornerback spot. And Josiah Scott, we've kind of seen what we needed to see, right? He hasn't been able to fill in enough at the slot position when Avonte Maddox was injured. Safeties is Justin Evans. At one point, Justin Evans was one of the first free agent moves Philadelphia made, and you kind of thought, oh, well, he's going to make the roster as a backup. But now that they drafted Sidney Brown, there's just not a lot of room for Justin Evans, and the age is the issue here. Now, he has the experience, but with the signing of Terrell Edmonds, Philadelphia has that veteran presence at safety, and so barring injury and Evans playing very, very well, I just don't see there being any chance of him actually making the roster in the end. And, of course, with punters, Aaron Sipos, Ty Zentner, I think Sipos is going to win this one, although people on Twitter want Zentner to go ahead and win, but Sipos had a better OTAs, he had better length, better hang time. This will be a, TBD decision at the final cut. Whoever plays better in training camp and preseason will make the roster. Now, in terms of long shots, these are the other players not mentioned who have a really long shot in order to go ahead and make this roster. We're not going to go through every single one of them, but most are very obvious, right? Kennedy Brooks, extreme long shot to make the roster. Charleston Rambo, Jaden Hasselwood, Tyree Cleveland, the guys that they signed from either the XFL or undrafted free agents. Even Greg Ward has a long shot to make this roster with the addition of Olamide Zaccheaus. Brady Russell, Dalton Keeney. I mean, look at the names on this list. Who of this list is going to actually make the roster? I don't see anybody on there. Unless Teron Jackson wants to go ahead and step things up. Davion Taylor, aforementioned, is on there as well. You got Eli Ricks as a cornerback, potentially as a practice squad guy. This long shot category is more specifically the practice squad category, and I see most of these guys not making the roster, but potentially being one of the 15 or 16 undrafted free agents who make the practice squad and can eventually maybe make an active roster, whether for Philadelphia or somebody else in the entire National Football League. Okay, plenty more stuff happening over the next couple of days and weeks. Plenty of shorts going down right now as well. Be sure to check those out here on the main channel. Of course, we'll keep an eye out as we get closer and closer to training camp. Philadelphia going to be in the news a lot. It's going to be a hot and heavy, fun July 25th up there at the NovaCare Complex when things get started. This is your one-stop shop. Be sure to stay tuned for all we have going on in the future. I'm Thomas Mott. This has been the Thomas Mott Show.